Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video in which we are going to talk about volume displacement. So I thought about taking the topic from the video before and the one before that even and combine those. So volumes and displacement, and therefore make a third part of the displacement series. So without further ado, let's grab your coffee and let's jump right in. As always, let me show you what we are going to do today. So this is our scene we are trying to recreate. And while doing so, I'm trying to explain all the inner workings of the volume displacement. By the way, if you're just after the scene, you can download that on my Patreon if you want. Alrighty, let's jump into the scene building and get going. If you're not interested in building and just want to learn about the volume displacement, you can jump ahead to this chapter mark. For us, the first mark in building is creating a torus, some even call it a donut, would you believe that? And change some values here. Of course, I already know that, so we are going with 500 ring radius, 64 segments, pipe radius 150, and pipe segments 32. And then we move it a little bit on the y-axis so it hovers above the floor. Nice. If you watched the last video about volumes, you know that there are multiple ways to turn an object into a volume inside of Cinema 4D. For example, you can use the volume builder, or you can use the native Octane tools object to volume. I'm going to use the native tools because they are closer to the Octane core. For that, we need a Octane object tag. Inside of there, go to particle rendering and change it to mesh to volume. And we can already see something here, but before this blackness inside of it turns it into a bagel of death, let's actually add a volume. Now, Octane has two different volume shaders that you can use. One is the older volume medium and one is the newer standard volume. The standard volume has the advantage of letting you adjust the density with a shader, which we did in the foam tutorial, upper right corner if you're interested. So because it's more modern and the newer implementation, let's choose this one. And now we can see it looks better, but not great yet. And this is because the shader basically over-provides. So let's go into the shader and have a look, and we can see the density value spread across. While we need that in some of the channels as the density itself, otherwise we only see our bounding box. We don't need that in the scattering. So let's go and delete the density out of there, and we can see it looks much better. Another thing I always change is the transparency here. So if we put that to fully white, you can see the volume is gone. So the other way around, if we put that to fully black, we get the most density out of it. To make this look less like Minecraft, let's change a couple of settings. For example, the volume step percent. We talked about this in the last video. And if we use the mesh to volume from Octane, we can set this to 100%. Also, to get a more cloud-like appearance, let's change the density, which is very high, to actually 5%. We can still see the single voxels, so what we can do is go back to our tag and change the voxel size. Bigger here means lower resolution, so if we go from 40 to 100, we get even more Minecrafty look. So let's go the other direction to 10 millimeters. Here we go. And with that, I think we are ready for prime time. In other words, let's start volume displacement. As the other displacement methods, this is accessed via the shaders. So let's go to the node symbol in our Octane object tag. And there we have it, the standard volume with our displacement input. Now, displacing volumes is a little bit different than displacing surfaces. For those surface-based displacements, we need a coordinate or a UV map to define a point, and then the normal along the surface provides the z-axis to displace along. Since we don't have that in volumes, we need a three-dimensional shader. If you watch a lot of my tutorials, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, a 3D noise. Before we touch any nodes though, let's enable snapping for a more clean experience. And then scroll down to the Octane noise and attach it to the displacement slot. Not a lot is happening, and this is because of two reasons. One, our noise isn't 3D yet. So let's go with the old trick by going with a projection, and inside of the projection change it to XYZ to UVW. Now it's 3D, but we still don't see a lot. And this is because the noise or the displacement is tied to the voxel size. I will explain what I mean by that in a minute. So let's first make something visible here. To do that, I'm going to add a range node. Here we go. So the range allows us to map the values that we get in to a greater range. So for example, instead of 0 to 1, 0 to 25. Here we go. Now we can see something. If you watched carefully, two things were happening. One, the volume moved to the lower left, and also parts of it got cut off. Maybe you can see it better from another perspective here. Yeah, so here we go. You can see the cut off parts better. Let's tackle what's happening one by one. So why does the volume move? It's rather simple. We have a chart time coming up where this might be even more explanatory than this one here. But if we move just one output here, you can see that it's moving to the lower left and also to the set a little bit. And this is because we are moving in 3D space, so we should also have negative values. So if we go from -15 to +15, you can see the placement is much better. But you still can see that the overall displacement is sort of diagonally. So we can make this even stronger to show more. Here we go. Diagonal donut. So the reason why this is happening is basically that we have three coordinates, x, y, and z, but we have those three channels, R, G, and B, which all house the same information as our noise is black and white. So R, G, and B move the x, y, and z displacement. To emphasize a little bit better what's going on, I have made this cube here where all of those axes are locked to each other. So x, y, z is R, G, and B. So our noise is only having one color at a time. So when I change the value here in the cube, you can see I can only move it diagonally. And this is exactly the same what's happening to our displacement. So with our scene, to get rid of the diagonality of our torus, the best way actually would be to use a colored noise that gives us a separate noise in R, G, and B. Now, since Octane doesn't have that, we have to make it our own. To do so, let's clean this up a little bit and move our nodes here. And what we need to do is introduce a new node, and this is the channel merger. Here we go. So we have red, green, and blue. And you probably know already where this is going. So let me duplicate this noise 2 more times and then pipe it into the red, green, and blue channel respectively. Now this is exactly the same as it was, but we have now the chance to alter those channels. For example, by shifting the noise on the X translation 100 units and the second one on the Y translation, for example, they just have to be different. Now the displacement is much more uniform. Now that we've dealt with our diagonality problem, let's fix the other one, which is our cutoff. Fortunately, this is rather easy as there's a setting in our shader, so let's go into our shader and search for the volume padding. This setting will extend the boundaries of our voxel based on the bounding box of the object. So for example, if we go for 50%, this will add half of the way between the original size of our objects to the outside of our boundaries for the voxels. Be careful not to extend that too much, because the ray tracing has to do more because there's more volumes in the scene. And this basically can be adjusted dependent on the size of your displacement. So if I go lower here, the volume padding doesn't need to be as high. And welcome to chart time. I tried to make it short, I promise. So we have a block of volume in the scene. You know where to get this. Running gag from the last video. And also we have a camera in the scene to trace rays. So let's do so. They stop all at the boundary of the cube here. And this is just to get across my explanation a little bit better. Usually they would be all over the place, also inside of the volume. What happens with volume displacement is that those rays usually are sampling the volume at the point where they hit, but with the displacement, the point is offset by a vector. And this vector is the voxel distance multiplied by the input value in the displacement. If the displacement has different values coming from, for example, our noise, you get different vectors in different directions. So before sampling, the camera rays are being offset along those vectors, and then they will be sampled. So what can happen is that a ray that was formerly inside of the volume is now moved outside of the volume and sampling a density that is 0, meaning that there is a hole inside of the volume displayed. The other way around is of course also possible, so a ray that was originally outside of the volume is now moved inside of the volume, and therefore the camera thinks there's some volume outside of it, and therefore moving the surface of the volume back and forth. And this is basically all there is to it, and this is chart time over. Welcome to 3D Land. Before we go into the bonus section and I show you how to add color and some variants to the displacement, let's tackle one more very important point. As I just said in chart time, one of the components of the displacement is the voxel size. So if I make the voxel size bigger or smaller, my whole displacement changes. Let's show you very drastically by going from 10 to 100, so 10 times larger. You can see that the detail is still there because the displacement is not relying on the voxel density itself, it just displaces the rays, but you can see it's looking totally different. And this ties rather nicely into the reason why I created this channel in the first place, to give you the knowledge what's happening behind the scenes, so you can make informed decisions. As I said, the voxel size is part of our formula and we changed the voxel size by 10, so we have to divide by 10 another value, and this is the range here, basically our displacement amount. So if we go minus 1.5 and 1.5 here, you can see that we get our displacement shape back. To be honest, that's a little bit tedious and I wish it was done a little bit differently, but this is the way it is, so if you know, and then you can compensate for that. Now, to create our bonus, we need the higher resolution, or we want it, so let's go back a couple of steps so we have back our old Torus. And welcome to our bonus. When I started making the scene or preparing for it, I thought, what can we do to make this a little bit more interesting? And then fields came into mind. If you don't know about Octane fields, I made a video about this in the upper right corner if you're interested. So we are going to utilize fields to control the strength of our displacement as well as add in some color. Let's get started and give the field something to grab onto by adding a null object. The null object should revolve around the torus. So what we need to do is give it some path. I opted for a circle spline to do that. To make it align with the torus, let's move it inside of the torus, go to the XZ axis and set the dimension to the same that the torus had. Here we go, and let's null it out, and you can see now it aligns with the torus quite well. To align the null to the spline, let's right click and go align to spline, drag the spline in here, go tangential and let's animate. So frame 0, 0%, frame 200, 100%. And now it's revolving around the spline, which we want. Drag it in here so we have everything at one place. Let's actually get going with fields. So go into the shader field and we need a spherical field. Here we go. And we need a projection for that to give it the position of the null. So let's do this. And inside of the projection, of course, XYZ to UVW. To avoid translation errors, we want to go to world space here and then drag in the null. Now, let's actually display what we created. So select all the old nodes and move them back. Add in a multiply. Let's also disable the preview here and multiply what comes out the range with our field. Here we go. To give you a little bit better of an overview, what we also can do is flap open the scatter here and also drag in the field into the color. And now you can see this is basically a gradient. Since we want to exchange the gradient for colors later on, but the whole back half of our torus is black, what we need to do is increase our fall-off radius to 1.25 to encompass our whole torus. If you paid attention, you can see that the displacement moved back with the gradient, which we don't want. We only want it in the front half of the torus. So what we can do is get another range node and instead of increasing the values, actually clamping it. So if we bring that into the right slots, then go clamp and put the input min to 0.25, we are basically limiting the displacement to the front half, which we want. Nice. Alrighty, almost done. So what we need to do now is bring in the color. So what we need to do is get a Octane gradient going and pipe the field through it to the color. So what I already done in the older scene is copied my initial gradient. So if I paste it here, you can see our pastelic torus. Let's also go inside of the camera and set the rotation of the torus to 45-45 by the H and P rotation. I think the displacement of the original was a little bit larger, so let's go from -25 to 25 to mitigate that. And last but not least, if we now move the torus, you can see that the noise moves through it. So there's a way to mitigate that also by going back to our texture projections here for our noise and then link the torus to every one of those. Here we go. And then also make them all adhere to world space. Now, if we now move and still you can see the noise moving through, this is actually a update issue. So what we can do for that is go to our tag again, main, and then force updates enabled. So now if we move, there should be no movement in the noise. But if we move our timeline, of course, then we get our nice movement here. And this is basically it. Okay, hold your horses. This is a good example how a scene evolves because I wasn't quite satisfied with the outcome here. So as you've seen in the beginning, I added a light source and we're going to do that to this scene as well. This needs some restructuring, but this isn't as bad as it sounds. So let's get going. Alrighty, restructuring part 1. So we have this torus here, and due to this tag, everything inside it is turning into a volume, including our eventual light. So we need a parent object on top of it. Let's alt-click and create this null, and let's call it volume. Here we go. Let's also move out the circle and the null here. So the actual most efficient way to create the light source is by duplicating the torus, call that light, and also delete the tag from there. Then for a second turn off the original torus and make this a lot smaller, so 50 should be good. Since we only want to light parts of the volume, let's go for the slice here. To make the null object the middle of it, let's move from -90 to 90. Let's actually create the light material by going for a diffuse material here, call it light. Go inside of there, make the diffuse completely black, and then we are going to get there and go to the emission and create a texture emission. Let's assign the material, then go into the texture emission, go to the power and set it to around 5 and turn on surface brightness. Now this is rather dark, but we can help ourselves with a RGB spectrum. So what we want to do is 1, 0.2, 0.1, so a bright orange, put that into the texture, and there's our light. The only other thing we want to do is fade out the ends of it. To make this happen, we are going to use a gradient generator. This needs to be linear, so let's go to the gamma and set it to 1, and then plug it into the opacity. This makes the transparency flow from one side to the next, and we need this to be middled. So what we can do is use a Octane gradient here. To get there, we need to get the white point to the middle, so 50%, and then make another point on the other side that is black. And now we have our middled light. Now the only remaining things to do is turn back on the torus and then move the light inside of the null because the null is moving and it will take the light with it. So you can see this whole system now is working and we have a light where we have the most displacement. Very nice, and it's looking much better than before. Alrighty, this should now really be it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you gained some knowledge through the video. I have the feeling that especially if you do a lot of volumes and didn't know about volume displacement, this could be really helpful. Since this video is already on the longer side, let's, without further ado, thank those people who made this video possible, my patrons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen, Just a Freakin', and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, for Die Thieves, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Graham Bucknell, James Conkle, Joel Mackimer, John Edward, Muradan Axos, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Kuok An Dang, Ralf, Random Capybara, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, and Yassin Rupp. Thank you all so very much for making it possible to produce those videos that you all enjoy. Hi there, my XYZ vector lovers. Thank you very much for joining in. This video once again was one that took a lot longer than I anticipated. When I conceived it, I thought, this can't take longer than 10 minutes, can it? And well, here we are at the 20-minute mark. So thank you very much for watching and sticking with me that long. By the way, Blender Conference was awesome. Thank you for talking with me. Actually, I was recognized a couple of times. That's really nice. And of course, I met a lot of nice people there. Now back on track. If you want to show your appreciation and please the algorithm overlords, you are free to post a sun behind clouds emoticon in the comments down below. I really appreciate it, and as always, I wish you a great start into this week, or if you're watching this later, a good overall time. See you next time, and happy noise tuning. Bye!